I want to circle us back to Japan for our final segment here, because Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has sparked a related row with China. She told Parliament that a Japanese attack on Taiwan would also threaten Japan and therefore could trigger Japanese military action. I know we've discussed it in various points earlier in this debate, but I want to focus on it just in this last segment. Bill, I want to ask you, is there any justification to Japan's concerns here that an attack on Taiwan also threatens Japan's national security?
Well, it completely upends Japan's security position in East Asia. At the moment, all of the islands that are off China's coast are, in effect, controlled by governments who have a friendly relationship with the US and are skeptical, let's say, of China. Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, etc. And if that changes, then of course it's going to fundamentally change Japan's strategic position. That's just a fact of geopolitics, geostrategy. So therefore, it is going to critically affect Japan's security posture. And also, as a supplement, any war that involves, around Taiwan that starts to involve United States forces, well, a lot of those forces are based in Japan. There may be attacks on American forces in Japan, for example. So again, that would necessarily impact, Japanese security. So I think what she was saying, although it was, absolutely, red rag to China's bull here, was basically, she was just saying the quiet part out loud. Everybody knows this, but you're just not supposed to say it in public.
What do you think about that, Victor? I mean, security postures change, geopolitics develops, alliances, friends, foe, that all changes with time. Why isn't Japan allowed to update and modernize its security posture?
First of all, Prime Minister Takaichi's very outrageous remark is a very dangerous indication of new Japanese fascism and new Japanese militarism. Why? Because ever after Japan's unconditional surrender in 1945, this was the first time a sitting Japanese prime minister threatened use of war against another country. And that country turned out to be China. Now, Japan is strictly, legally prohibited to constitute another threat to China by law, by the terms of its unconditional surrender. We should not forget that. We should always keep that in mind. The terms of the unconditional surrender of Japan to China.
But Japan wouldn't be the first country to change that. That was a long time ago. And what's been written in the UN doesn't necessarily is always adhered to.
No, it's not a long time ago. Japan caused the loss of life, 35 million lives in China. China will never forget the atrocities and the crimes against humanity they committed in China. And the burdens placed upon Japan by the unconditional surrender instrument have no time limit. Japan is always required to be a peaceful nation rather than a militaristic nation. And I told my American friends, remember Pearl Harbor. If Japan can betray its commitments it undertook as far as its unconditional surrender to China is concerned, they can easily betray the commitments they entered into vis-a-vis the United States. And they need to prepare for another attack on Pearl Harbor or anywhere else. Therefore, to make sure that Japan remains a pacifist country is an utmost important thing in this part of the world. And no country, no individual, including our two distinguished panelists here together, we are sharing this panel, should ever allow the danger of new Japanese militarism or new Japanese fascism to raise its dangerous head. It will be quashed before it can be raised against China.
Ross, is Japan more of a threat in the region than China is?
Japan's security concern, first and foremost, is to defend the Japanese homeland. And frankly, I was a little critical of the reaction here in Taiwan to Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks because there were many people here who took it as a commitment to come to fight for Taiwan, which is not really what she said. The most basic essence of what she said was, if there is a conflict between China and Taiwan, it is, of course, a security risk to Japan. And that's true, as Bill pointed out. And they would be on alert. They would be watching. They may have to evacuate Japanese nationals from Taiwan if there's a war, and they would be using their military resources, understandably, to do that. But she didn't specifically say that Japan will come to Taiwan's military assistance in the event of a conflict. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people here in Taiwan reacted that way. And there were Taiwan politicians putting photos on social media of themselves eating Japanese seafood and saying, oh, we should all go visit Japan because Chinese tourists aren't going to Japan. I thought that was a bit of a silly overreaction here in Taiwan. But as far as how the rest of the region views Japan's increased military spending in recent years and going forward, China is certainly critical of that, but we really don't see or hear a critical voice from other countries in the region. We don't see the ASEAN countries criticizing Japan's increase in defense spending, nor do we hear those countries criticizing Australia's increase in defense spending, or even the United States' increased interest in deployments in this part of the world as well. So to answer your question, no, we don't hear that message coming from ASEAN countries, for example.
Allow me to make a point. Yes. Before the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, not many people in the United States were critical of what the Japanese government was doing at the time. But then Pearl Harbor happened. So the fact that not many people are critical of what Japan is doing doesn't mean that they are doing the right thing. You need to put it in historical perspective. You need to realize that the current international order we are living in through was more or less started in 1945 upon the unconditional surrender of Japan. That is the pillar. That is the Big Bang event. And we are all living in the overshadow of that Big Bang event. Now, if you want to change it, if you really want to allow the rearmament of Japan and the remilitarization of Japan, even if you are not fully aware of the consequences, you may one day be surprised. Look how many Australian soldiers were butchered by the Japanese military. Look at how many British prisoners of war were killed. Look at the long march of death. And look at all the atrocities they committed in the Philippines, in the ASEAN nations, in all the Pacific islands against the Americans, for example. And do you think President Roosevelt said the wrong thing when he said Japan was the country of infamy? Today was the day of infamy, and the Americans will never allow another Pearl Harbor. Why? Because you should never think about the possibility of Japan betraying its commitments it entered when it unconditionally surrendered to raise its dangerous militaristic head in this part of the world. Because, allow me to warn you, that moment will be a moment of destruction. That moment will herald in war, and that moment will also herald in the annihilation of Japan as a country, because they betrayed their commitments. They want to rearm, they want to reconstitute another threat to a country like China, and they will forfeit their right to live as a peaceful nation, as they committed to when they unconditionally surrendered to China in 1945.
All right, let me just get a final response from Bill on that. What do you think? I mean, their unconditional surrender, times have changed. Are countries not allowed to adapt to the changing environment, or is Japan too much of a risk?
Well, I think Victor's bellicose, warlike language is an amazing revelation, really. I mean, I don't think anybody in the region is convinced by his portrayal of Japan, but they're increasingly worried about China's posture. It's China is the country that's the one that's threatening to go to war. Japan isn't. You know, as we were hearing, ASEAN, Southeast Asian countries, other countries, haven't raised concerns about what Japan's doing, but they are mightily concerned about what China is doing. And Victor's language today is the language of the 1930s, war, taking territory, fighting people. I don't think it convinces the region. I don't think it convinces the region of China's case. I think it convinces the region that China is the problem here. And I think, that's increasingly the situation that we're heading into in the next few years.